Hello, everybody, and welcome to another GoIndieNow live panel discussion show. I am your host, Joe Compton, and in a minute, I'll allow my panelists to introduce themselves so that you can meet each and every one of them. We have an awesome show for you, but tonight I wanted to start things a little differently. I wanted to read you something and tell you a little bit about what to expect tonight. So, without further ado, let me a succession of loud and shrill screams bursting suddenly from the throat of a chained form seemed to thrust me violently back. For a brief moment, I hesitated. I trembled. Unsheathing my rapier, I began to grope it without recess, with it about the recess, sorry. But the thought of an instant reassured me. I placed my hand upon the solid fabric of the catacombs and felt satisfied. I reapproached the wall. I replied to the yells of him who clamored. I re-echoed. I aided. I surpassed them in volume and strength. I did this, and the clamor grew still. It was now midnight, and my task was drawing to a close. I had completed the 8th and 9th and 10th tier. I had finished a portion of the last and the 11th. There remained but a single stone to be fitted and plastered in. I struggled with its weight. I placed it partially into the destined position. But now there came from out the niche a low laugh that erected the hairs upon my head. It was succeeded by a sad voice, which I had difficulty in recognizing as that of the noble Fortunato. The voice said, yeah, very good joke indeed. An excellent jest. We will have a many rich laugh about this at the palazzo. Over our wine. The Amontillado, I said. That story changed my life. It was the day that I realized that I wanted to become a writer. That is the cast of the Amontillado by Edgar Allan Poe. That was toward the end of the story. And short stories is what got me into reading. It got me into writing. And it made me realize that I could do this. And that's an important step for any writer in their development, in their procurement of trying to become a writer. And I think that for me, that always stuck with me, that story. And it was then that I knew that that's the kind of writer I want to be. And thus, tonight, we're going to discuss. We have an awesome panel of short story writers who have mastered the field, who are amazing, amazing writers. They've done more than just write short stories, but short stories has a special place in their hearts. And I am really honored to have each and every one of them here tonight. And with that, let's introduce everybody and get this party started. So I'm going to start going by my left to right, and that would begin with Anita.
Hi, I'm Anita Stewart. I write under A.F. Stewart, and I write horror, and I write fantasy, and I have several collections of short stories, and I'm in a few anthologies as well. So I'm here to talk about what makes short stories so much fun for me.
Awesome.
Okay.
Very cool. I'm excited about that. All right, Amanda, you are next.
Uh-oh. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. I couldn't find my mute button. I am Amanda MABRY, dark fiction short story author, fantasy author, and poetess, and also one of the founders and co-owners of Our Right Side. And I am excited because short stories are my favorite thing to write, so I have a lot to say.
Awesome. Very cool. We'll look forward to it. All right, and then we have Axel and Robert from Coffin Press. Go ahead, guys.
Hey, how are you? I'm Axel HOWERTON, and
this is Rob BOSE.
We're Coffin Press. You see behind us. We're a publisher, historically mostly of short story anthologies. In fact, our first anthology, Death by Drive-In, featured both Jessica McHugh and A.F. Stewart. Jessica McHugh also shows up in this one that came out last year. And we foster a love for short stories and weird and dark short stories. And we just, you know, we don't make any money off short story anthologies, but we just love putting them out there because we love short stories. We love writing short stories, and we want to put out the stuff that we enjoy and that we think deserves a voice in the world by authors like this. That's our story, I guess.
Very cool. Well, thank you guys for being here. We appreciate it.
Yeah, we also write our own short stories too.
That's true. Right there.
Very nice. All right, Deborah.
There, I found it. All right. I'm Deborah Parmley, and I primarily write romance, but I write romance in many different subgenres like historical, contemporary, military heroes, paranormal, futuristic, dystopian. So I'm a little bit all over the place. I started out writing short stories first, and that's how I was first published, and I still write them. And I'll talk more about that later, but it's still one of my favorite forms to read and to write. So I was really excited to be invited here. So thanks for inviting me, Joe.
Thank you for being here. I really appreciate it. All right, Mr. Gross, are you ready? See you moving around there.
Yeah. Hey, what's up, guys? Sorry, I was just adjusting my workspace here. Yeah, so I write stuff, primarily dark fantasy, horror, adventure, that sort of thing. But I have dabbled in short stories. Although I don't have any short stories published, I am currently going to be having one published in an anthology later in the middle of the summer coming up. And so primarily I work on, full-length novels, but I think after I finish the trilogy that I'm working on, that I'll be publishing my own anthology of short stories, which will come probably in the years to come. But nice to meet everybody. I'm Frank, otherwise under the name FD Gross. Thanks.
Very nice. Thank you for being here, my friend. All right, Jessica.
That mute button, right? Hi, everyone. I'm Jessica McHugh. I am a novelist and short story writer of whatever genre pops into my head at the moment. I default to horror, I think. My first short story collection is coming out at the end of this month, and have feelings about it. Feelings I will convey later on in this discussion. I'm super happy to be here. Thank you so much for having me. I'm going to mute this again now.
Thank you for being here. I really appreciate it. That's awesome. All right, Mr. Bateson, finish us off.
I'm Timothy Bateson. I'm an author writing mostly short stories right now, but working on my first novel. I collaborate with my wife on the Shadows Over Seattle series. They're both short stories and novels. I'm also a blogger supporting indie authors, so please do check me out at some point. In the meantime, I'm going to hand back to Joe because I know this is going to be a very interesting panel.
Thank you, sir. I'm very glad you're here. All right, everybody. So let's talk a little bit about short stories and the discipline of writing them. What is it that you like about writing short stories that you do not get from any other form of writing?
For me, oh, sorry, go ahead. You knew that was going to happen.
Well, short stories, I think, and for me, a lot of times they're more character driven. So that's what I get out of them, because you can just take like the one character and explore his in-depth stuff in a short story, or two characters, or whatever you're doing. That's why I like them, I think. And and they're quicker to write than a novel too, which is, if you want to just have a burst of creativity and just get down a short story, because I've done that. I've sat down, I've just bunged one off and had it done in like a couple hours. So for me, it's creativity and character and all sorts of stuff like that.
Yeah, it's very, very much the same for me. I feel like with a short story, I get to focus more on the character, and really, I feel like with novels, I kind of can get lost in the world building and like all the culture and everything. And when it comes to a short story, I feel very laser focused on characters, their goals, their obstacles, and what they're really trying to get out of the story, more than when I dive into a novel and I feel like I'm more the author. I'm like, what do I want to get from this gigantic thing I have created? When I'm writing a short story, it's very much character driven from beginning to end, and it's I feel like I can get into the character a lot quicker and harder, and just not like Anita said, like just really knock it out really fast.
Yeah, I'll have to agree with you. It's you know, my take on writing a short story is simply this: it just doesn't take that long as a novel, you know. I've been working on this last novel for like 2-3 years now, and it's still not finished. But I can write a short story, and I can get in and get out, and not be so hammered down and weighed down with being inside that character's head for too long. But the good thing about it is it's, in a way, it's therapeutic for me anyway. And in most cases, it's usually dark stories. So if anybody else got anything else they want to put in.
I'll jump in on that. Well, I think when you're writing a novel, you have the weight of the novel on your shoulders, because you have certain things you have to meet, like your word count and your story and your world has to all come together, and you've got to spend time building that. With a short story, I get to play, I get to experiment, I get to say, what if, what happened this day or this year, and twist it all around, flip it on its head, and then write it a different way, you know, the next week. And I haven't spent so much time experimenting on something that's going to take, you know, months or a year to write, and then with the hope that it turns out the way you want, or that your reader will want. And then you also get quicker feedback from your reader, because you've written it fast and it's got a different energy to it when you write it. I mean, I get fired up about it. I never get bored with a story because it's over so fast. There's no time to get bored. I don't have to motivate myself to come back to it like I do for a longer book. When I started out, romance novels had to be 100,000 words. That's a lot of words. So, you know, that's an investment of time and energy, and you have to keep making yourself come to the page. With a short story, I can just go, wow, what am I going to do today? How am I going to play today? And honestly, most people don't see my short stories because a lot of them are experimental, and I get done with them and I'm like, no, that's not quite what I wanted to do. So it might, you know, sit in the drawer.
I feel like for me, maybe I'm a little unique in the perspective here, that I actually spend a lot of time on each short story. I have some where I've taken upwards from 6 months to a year to polish. I agree with the character-driven point of it, but I also put a lot of energy into building a tactile environment for the reader. And with short stories, you have a much smaller window to do that. And so I enjoy that challenge of how can I really make them see and feel and taste and touch without weighing down the story. So it's a really fine balance for me of how to work in those details into the character development, because that's really where the focus is, obviously. But now I feel challenged to try to knock out some quicker because I spend so much time on mine.
Yeah, I'd agree with that.
I mean, that's a good fun part of it, honestly, is that balance of, you have this entire world built up in your head. So how much is the right amount to give to the reader without weighing them down? you have, how much do you hold back as the writer that's beneficial to the reader in a, because it needs to be as few words as possible. I think, you know, short stories, you want them as the most powerful configuration of words in the smallest amount of time, basically, and revealing that world without, oh my gosh, like bogging it down. That is I think the magic of short storytelling, and I think it's it's a hard thing to do.
Yeah, I'd agree with all of that, especially the experimentation. I know when I'm writing short stories, I've written zombie stories and vampire stories and werewolf stories, and, you know, gangster stories, crime stories, every genre that I wanted to explore, every type of story that I liked, I'm able to just try one of those. And I know same thing with Rob's book. He has so many different genres that he touches on, so many different approaches and different techniques that he touches on, and it's so much easier to experiment and try things out and really get into things with a short story than it is when you're trying to keep a large narrative together, you know. And I've written novels in like 6 to 8 weeks, and it's still, you have to keep things tight or you just lose it. So it's a lot, it gives you a lot more room to explore in a short story than it does in a novel, I think.
Yeah, and the other thing that I like is that you can write, you know, shorter pieces about characters from your books, or write interconnected short stories. So that makes it a lot of fun. So you can explore little pieces of other things and not have to put them in your books. Or, you know, if you find something in your book that doesn't really fit, you can just pull it out and write a little story about it.
Yeah, and it's a great way, like you say, to explore characters. You know, I have a whole separate book of short stories about characters from my first novel that just spun off and people liked them, so I just kept writing them.
All right, Tim.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point, because I looked at, when I was doing my Shadowzone Seattle novel series, I kept having particular parts of the stories that wanted to intrude from character backgrounds. So I took those out. They're now the prequel series, little short stories that basically dive back into the characters, into historical events in their lives, explore them in a little bit more detail than you can in a novel, and actually show you how the characters develop from a beginning point in the story to the person they are when you meet them in the novel. And I think it's a very valid way of world building. It also gives you a little bit of a Bible to go back to for material that you might want to use time and again, or just quickly reference, but you don't want the reader to necessarily have that entire info dump all in one go.
Awesome. It sounds like to me that you guys approach it the same way filmmakers approach it, in that short stories tend to be your vehicle to try things out at and experiment and give it an opportunity to breathe and kind of find a rhythm or a style, and maybe even continue a story or give some origin to a story that already exists. And that's pretty awesome. This is a question from the audience, and it's from Mike Elliott at Dark Realm Diaries. And he wanted to know, how do you keep it to a short story? How do you stop it from being unwielding and becoming a novella or a full-blown novel? Do you guys have a technique? Is there something you do? Do you set out to just write and then whatever it becomes, or is it always you're setting yourself up for a short story and you know how to structure that?
I have 2 stages I go through. I do a little bit of exploratory writing to get an idea of the character. Then I pick the part that's going to be the most interesting to explore in detail and actually outline it. And then from there, I build the short story and figure out what length I want to go to and go from there.
Yeah, I think when talking about short stories and coming up with an idea for a short story, for me personally, I really don't think about it too much. I kind of, if I'm set like a set of parameters that I need to go by, I might sit there and mull over it for about a week before something comes to me. And I'm kind of more like just don't really think about it. It's more of like a feel kind of thing. I think more because I'm probably more into my novel writing and focusing on a certain character or characters that have prevailed over an extended amount of time. So then when I go into short story mode, it's kind of like a break or a way to cope with my writer's block, which I don't get it often, but it is a good way to kind of rest the gears, change the mode, and do a little bit something different. And sometimes you set it aside and it becomes something greater down the road, or it's something that you might shove into your anthology, volume 2, volume 3, volume 4, whatever.
I agree. I don't really have a lot of discipline when it comes to what an idea is going to be. I think generally my intention is always short story, but I just kind of let things flow where they will. So I've had a short story that is now a 3-part trilogy that comes out later this year. I have another short story that I started for an anthology, but I have fallen so in love with this story and it's longer than what the anthology allows. So my options were either cut the story or just offer them a section and publish it on its own. And I've opted to publish it on its own because there is no part of the story, granted it's still just a novella, but there's no part that I would be willing to cut out of it to force it to fit into a project it was slated for.
That's so funny because I just had the short story collection I have coming out at the end of this month is the same thing. I wrote this story for an anthology call and it was a little too long. It was too long. It was way too long. So I cut a bunch of it for this call and then it just wasn't the story it was supposed to be, and it just like it got rejected, and rightly so, because I had like edited all the heart out of it. And then I ended up putting everything back in and then even expanding the world some more. It was eventually published as a novella, but then the place like tanked and I'm like, oh great, well now what am I gonna do with this poor short story that lived as a novella for no, but then it ended up, I sent it out for a call and they were like, hey, you know, the novella is great, but would you mind writing more short stories in the universe to make a collection? And I was like, yes, please, and thank you. So I mean, I got to write a whole bunch of short stories. And I mean, for me with short stories, I love to write novels, and short stories to me are very much a challenge because I tend to go on and on and on and on, as you will see in this panel. Which is why I'm trying to use the mute button as much as possible. Bear with me. It's very much for me a gut feeling thing. I teach creative writing for kids, and we do short stories. And to me, when I get bored, when I'm writing a short story, that means that something is going wrong, hugely wrong. And that's kind of the thing when I find the kids too. I mean, when they start to get bored, I'm like, so let's go back and examine what's actually the trajectory here in the story. What does the character want? Where is this headed? What are we trying to say? So for me, I'll hit kind of that wall. Either I'll feel it and it ends and it's great, it's perfect, or I'll end up like kind of unraveling and being like, okay, let's back up and see what's actually going on here. So very much a gut feeling thing until it's friggin' math and science and it gets all, I explode things.
No, another thing I want to just add real quick. I don't know if anybody else has this experience too, but when you're trying to write for a prompt and you're trying to work within these rules and guidelines, the kind of story that comes out is a lot different than a free-flowing short story that you're doing. And it's totally different. And I like taking on that challenge when it's called for. But I also like taking that break too, which I like to call leisure writing, you know, when you're not being so serious. And sometimes those are the best kind of stories that come out, the ones that are just come out from left field and you don't know where it came from, you know.
Yeah,
I'll say one thing about the restrictions of writing to a prompt or for anthology. I did one story, it was a sci-fi. I had a word restriction on the anthology, and I didn't think I really explored the story as well as I could have done from the character point of view. So once the rights to that story came back to me, I actually went back and I revisited the story and extended it. And I'm actually now in the process of extending it for a third time, which is actually a very interesting process. But it's given me more opportunities to do the personal side of the story and to bring out a lot more of the characterization than it would have done before. But it also changes the stakes of the story entirely. So writing for anthology can be an interesting beast, but there's nothing that beats actually going back and doing the story correctly.
I agree. I was going to say the same thing. I just published my first short story collection in March, and I've already gotten emails from several writers or from several readers requesting that I go back to some of these short stories and expand them and republish them for them. So I agree with, I think it was, I'm bad with names, Deborah earlier, who was saying that short stories gave her a chance to kind of explore and experiment. And then I think publishing in these collections gives you a chance to take those experiments and get actual readers who buy your books feedback and know where to put your creative energy in those stories that you've seeded.
And anyone who, with the experimentation thing, anybody who hasn't done a story a week, it is the greatest thing and most fun thing you could do as a short story writer. I've done a story a week in 2014 and 2017, and it's insane. You will write the weirdest things.
You know, Ray Bradbury, he used to talk about that.
That's why, yeah, that's why we ended up doing it.
One of my favorite authors, and I have to say that short stories have stayed with me ever since I started. I was published in short story before I ever had a novel written, and it was in a horror anthology. And the editor that put that together said, you know, Deborah, there's a lot of romance in this. And it's really funny looking back now, because I didn't know then that everything I try to write is going to have romance in it. It just is. I mean, I can write all the subgenres, but it's going to have romance. I'm not happy in it unless there is. So short stories have taught me about what I write. And I found that out by experimenting. And I found my voice by experimenting. So I write in a lot of different genres, but you know, that's what I like. Then when I had I was with 5 different publishers at one point. So at this point I was meeting deadlines, and I'm writing novels and novellas, and I'm very structured and very businesslike, and there's less play. Now there's still play, because writing always has play, but it's more structured. So just for fun, for me alone, I would dash off a story just for my, you know, writer's happy state of mind. Also because a publisher will try to put you in this box because they need to market you. So this is what you write under this name, and, you know, we're gonna, you know, market that, right? Well, I'm a Gemini. I refuse to be in a box. If you put me in a box, my imagination's going to go wild and start doing all kinds of crazy stuff. And I'll end up with something way over here that's got nothing to do with that box. So it's been a healthy thing for me as a writer to write the short stories back when I was with all these publishers. So fast forward to today, I'm not with all of these folks. I'm only with 2 of them. One of them has 2 of my short stories, and they actually had a couple programs which were kind of interesting. One was, and I may be jumping ahead to another question, but it kind of all ties into my storyline of me here, so I'll just get it all out there.
It's fine. You're making my job easier. That's fine.
Okay, good. So I have a couple of my experimental stories are there. I wanted to write a shapeshifter, right? Well, everybody's writing shapeshifters, and it's either, if it's romance, it's the hero, she's fallen in love with him, or, you know, it's some scary monster or something. I made mine a hamster. I wanted to do something different, you know, so I made mine a hamster, and it shapeshifts into this scary monster that devours and kills, and it creates holes in the ground, and it goes into holes, and so you got to go to the city to get away from it, because dirt's going to just give it more opportunity to sneak up on you and stuff. So I wrote that, and it's romance, and they published it. And I was hoping, because it was an experiment, I was hoping that it would go into their other line. They had 2 different lines. The one was called Lunchbox Shorts, and these were stories you could read on your lunch. Quick, fast reads, 99 cents, and they had a lot of their authors writing those. So I had two of my stories are in that line. Then they had another line, which was a serial line. So I was hoping that if that did well enough, they would bump it over to the serial, so I would write a follow-up to that and keep it going. Well, it didn't work out that way, and in fact, they have stopped doing both those lines since then. But that book's going to drop off contract this year, so that means I'll get it back, I can expand it. And in the meantime, I've gotten that feedback from the readers, which is really invaluable. And then the other one is a Christmas romance that's a fairy tale type of thing. She's under a spell, and the guy comes along, and it's happy ever after, but she's been cursed. So I was playing with those, and they found publishing homes, but those publishers couldn't keep those lines open. They weren't making enough money, so that goes into that. And now that I'm indie, I can do what I want, where I want, not bound by a contract. So my readers will be seeing a lot more playfulness and short stories and things like that, because it's going to be my way to have fun and find out what they like, what I like, if it all, gels together, and that kind of thing. And I want to give the floor to someone else now, so I'm not talking.
Well, I just wanted to jump in and say it's not all publishers, because that's exactly the kind of stuff that we want to publish. And we want people to have fun and be creative and give us the weirdest, most out there stuff that nobody else is putting out. That's what we want to see, and that's what we want to put out there. So there are publishers like us out there that, we're not trying to put people in a box and just make money. We want to have things that we love putting together. We've done weird Christmas stories, we've done weird Western stories, we've done straight up crime, we're doing Knucklehead Noir, which is like humorous dark crime. We're doing holiday dark crime. We're doing supernatural mystery next year. We just want to mix it up and do all kinds of things. We don't want to be somebody that only publishes body horror with nurses.
It could be okay.
That's probably a good niche, though.
I agree. At our right side, the majority of our authors are multi-genre authors, and we like it like that. I don't think that it hurts us marketing-wise to have them be multi-genre. It's just a little more marketing work for us, but it keeps their writing authentic, because not everybody is just a romance writer or just a horror writer. And when you try to force yourself to be just one genre, I think you really lose some of your voice.
So we didn't get to hear what you said, Jessica. What did you say?
Oh, I said I wanted to submit to the nurse thing.
I think
immediately, and just make it my collection also, please.
Phone. Damn microphone. For you, we will do that.
I've made it.
Multiple stories by MCHUGH here, and also A.F. Stewart, and numerous other people, and we're getting bigger and bigger people. But we still, everything we do, we try and put more established authors with new people coming up, so that we're helping people get exposure and helping new writers with, we're helping them edit, we're helping them learn, we're trying to help everybody, I guess, because we're just nice guys.
I think the Jack Burton experiment that you were talking about in the last panel you were on might lend itself to that that nurses subject. I might tackle that for you. Along the lines of marketing, since we got into it a little bit, so how are you guys selling your short stories? How are you guys putting your work out there? Is there a certain thing that's worked for you other than that? Is it putting it into a collection? Is it writing an anthology? Is it being a part of an anthology? Is it Patreon? Is it your blog? Talk about the unique ways in which you guys are getting your stories out there.
May I start?
Please.
While I have done some anthology entries for Darker Days that I released in March, I actually used my Patreon platform, and I published each one of the stories monthly over a year's period on my Patreon, and I supplemented during the month with quizzes and fun little things that added to each story. And then at the end of the year, I published the collection altogether, with my Patreon supporters obviously getting, their printed copies first. And I found that that was a very helpful way for me to market. This is an ongoing series. It will just be my short stories. And I think that having that platform helped me, because then I already have readers invested who are now getting other readers into the full collection.
I would do Patreon. I just, I work a lot, daytime job, so I find that trying to come up with material for Patreon, giveaway and freebie stuff for people to sign on, I just don't think I have enough material generated in order to do Patreon. So I think that's where I am as far as that goes. So I am looking for other ways to market short stories.
There are a lot of unique ways to use Patreon without necessarily having to give things away. Sometimes it's, like I said, the commitment of that finished book when it was done. If you're interested, I actually co-run a Patreon support group on Facebook with Heidi Angel and Joshua Robertson. And there's a great group of people in there whose pages you could peek at and get an idea. We don't want it to be extra work. Like I said, for me, I publish my stories that I actually put into my book, along with a few little fun things. And you can schedule things ahead of time, so you don't have to make it something that you're hands-on with 24/7. You could take a chunk of time on one day of the week, plan for the week or the month.
And I'll post the links to everything that is being talked about in this session tonight for everybody and everything. So if you come back in the replay, when the replay goes up, not only will I have that, but I'll have everything timestamped so you can find it. Back to the question at hand.
Okay. For me, I just started using Patreon for my short stories. I got for my series, like I have a couple of series short stories, and for my flash fiction. So I started using that. I'm still building my platform up over there, so nothing going on too much yet. But I've also submitted several short stories to anthologies. I have a few of those out, and I've published my own collections too, especially with my horror stories, my villain series. And I also do a lot on different blogs, like not so much short stories, but more flash fiction, and my drabbles, which are 100-word stories. And I've got a couple of things over on Wattpad too. So I'm sort of all over the place with my stories.
Can I say that I love Anita's website with the flash horror? I have been there. I used it for Inspirato for a flash story I wrote recently. I just read like drabbles and flash horror fiction for an entire day, and it was amazing and lovely. And I got the story written in like 2 days, and I was like, yeah, and I got paid like 2 days later. So thanks.
You're welcome.
I do a lot of my marketing and stuff like that through word of mouth, working with other authors, sharing links and things with people. I do a lot of work on the blog, advertising for other authors who cross-promote my material in return. Doing panels like this also helps because it gets your face out there and people get to learn a bit more about you as a person. So really, that's kind of the push on my end is getting my face out there and getting people to know that I write these particular types of stories and that I do work with other people. And hopefully, as a result of that, they actually start getting a little bit more interested in what I'm actually writing myself.
Yeah, I mostly I write short stories for anthologies. If I get an invitation, that's always lovely. But mostly I have the privilege of being able to write full time. Now I also have a bunch of part-time jobs that also work within the writing world, so thank goodness. But I like submitting to short story anthologies, especially ones with weird themes. I just finished a submission for a pizza horror anthology today. I'm doing one, working on one that's like, it has to be underground, like action horror. So I really like playing games in that way, because I work on novels mostly, and the short stories are kind of like my escape almost from, you know, the 9 to 5 that is writing novels or novellas. But I also love writing flash fiction. I went through a whole it's coming out from Carrion Press, 55 word stories that I wrote between November 2015 and March 2016. That's just crazy nonsense, and just throwing yourself into 55 words of world building that just seems so crazy. So I do that kind of stuff for Story a Week, and I also put a bunch of my Story a Week in 2017 on Patreon, unedited. And it's like a couple of people. It's not, I don't have a very big following, but it's fun to kind of, for the people that do follow my work, to get that kind of glimpse into the unedited, raw ridiculousness.
You know, I don't know how what the trend is as far as Patreon goes. You know, because I see a lot of people with Patreon, you know, and they're signing up $1 for this, you get all this, $5 for this, you get all that. I don't know how much that has caught on in the times that are now. You know, I'm kind of old school when it comes to short stories and anthologies and things like that. And even when I'm reading just for leisure, or when I just need a rest from whatever story I'm working on, I find that reading short stories is probably more attuned to my reading habits than a full-length novel, because it just takes so much time to read. So I don't know if the direction
I agree.
I don't know if, yeah, I don't know if the direction for, you know, as a beginning author, should you be writing short story anthologies as opposed to full-length novels? I'm not sure. I know that, you know, as a writer, you're gonna write whatever story is that coming to you and that needs to come out, obviously. But I always kind of find it interesting that, you know, it's finding that niche or what people want is really, I guess, the cream of the crop and what we're all looking for, if that makes any sense. But like, for instance, like AF Anita Stewart, you know, she sends her short stories out. If you sign up on her subscribe list, you know, she'll send you free stories or access to free stories, and that's how I discovered her pretty much. And her anthology stories, I liked it because they're very short, or for some of them anyway. And I find it good to be able to get in and out of somebody's head real quick, especially when you're a writer yourself. I know it's probably a lot different for people who are writers and who are not writers. There's writers and readers primarily. So if you're a writer, you kind of want to get in and get out. Whereas if you're a reader, you probably want to invest more time in a certain person or character's head.
Things have changed so much as far as where you can publish a short story. So I'm going to sound like a dinosaur here, but when I was in college, I was writing poetry and short stories, and back then you could get them in literary journals, and even those, a lot of those have closed. And paying avenues for short stories have kind of, a lot of our writers will say they dried up. If you were from traditional publishing like I am, that's what you were looking for, and you were trying to, get in there. And I, I obviously had a little bit of success and still have a couple out with some publishers. But I'm going to be honest with you, even if you have a short story with the publisher, they don't make much money. They just don't. And so I think we're asking too much from a short story if we're wanting it to be like, I want to write for a living. For me, I'm going to say this for me because every author's path is different. I want to do both. Writing larger books will allow me to do shorter stories. If I do both, then I can have this full-time writing career, which I do have. For a brand new writer, it's harder. And honestly, I don't know much about Patreon. It's not something that was around back then, and I haven't been in a position to try it. More than likely, what I'll be doing with mine when I get them back is I'll either be offering them to my newsletter subscribers, or as a special, like the Christmas one might be like a Christmas gift to readers. So I'm not worrying so much about making money off of them as I am about expanding my readership. So one thing that the publishers did do is that they would pull your stories together and they'd put you in an anthology, because then you've got the crossover readership, and they'll put an author that's better known with a brand new one, which was a great way to break in. You can still do that because there are enough of us out there that are hybrid authors like me and indie authors, and you can go into a collection together. I see a lot of it in the romance world. They're doing it for fundraisers, like the military romance authors. They'll do those for different, like, I've lost the name of it. There's one that does the dogs for the rescue dogs. I'm not saying that. Service dogs is what I want to say. So for a cause, and then they're doing something good. So those stories are doing more than just bringing readers to you. They're actually contributing to the community, which I think is a fantastic thing. And I tend to jump if I see that kind of thing. I was signed up to be in one of those with my third publisher, and I had the story written, and they closed their doors. It was going to the editor the next day, and I got the call. They were closing their doors. I took that story and turned it into a novella, and now it's out as a novella. But honestly, I was really sad that it was not in that fundraiser for our veterans. So there's so much more that you can do with a short story besides just say, can it make money? Can it make money? And the story itself, this may sound a little woo-woo, but the story knows what it wants to be and where it wants to go. If we could kind of loosen up a little bit with it, it's kind of weird, but you'll find that if you just hang out with people that are writing some similar things to you, someone will have an idea, and then you can jump in on it together, and you can go, hey, well, now we could put out a collection. And you could do that as an indie. You could go together and put out a collection, or see if one of your small presses would do that with you and some of the other authors. Because we all just want to share good stories and share. There's nothing wrong with sharing readers. Most readers, if they love to read, there is no such thing as too many books. And there's no such thing as too many stories. So the competition I see out there, I'm like, y'all, there's the Southern creeping out. If you are doing what you love and writing the stories you love, then it's gonna be better for everybody, because the stories will be better, your readers will be happier, and let's all stay positive here and watch for those opportunities to help a little bit. It's just another little something you can do with one of those short stories or two.
Yeah, I've got a few stories in some like the Christmas Lights anthologies. They're charity anthologies, and I'm part of that every year. So, yeah, there are several anthologies out there you can submit short stories to that the proceeds go to charity.
Do you guys at Coffin Off Press do any charity anthologies? The mute button is just a lovely, lovely tool. Oh, poor guys. There you
There
go.
we go. Okay, here we are.
Yeah, I just wanted to say a little bit about anthologies, since we're, Axel and I both submit stories to anthologies and publish anthologies. But the kind of crazy thing that's been happening lately, and we're doing it as well, is that people want much more folk. The anthologies are becoming narrower and narrower. So the themes that they're exploring are crazy, Southern Gothic.
Yeah, what was the one you did, the bike thing?
Yeah, Biketopia, bikes in space. Like they're becoming very specific, and which is weird now, because if you write stories for that particular thing, you might not have anywhere else. You might not have any other place to sell it, right? There just might not be another market for it unless you put it on your own. You do it yourself, and then when we do one of these anthologies that's very specific, most of the stories we get submitted aren't actually that theme, right? Like people just send us anything they have that's kind of like that. We usually get this kind of wave. At the beginning you get everybody's stories that's even
all the trunk stories,
even remotely similar to the theme. And then at the end you get the things that people actually specifically wrote, right? And then you can only take so many, so there's going to be a lot of these stories, and you see them popping up in various other places eventually. So.
And the first book that we did, the one that A.F. Stewart and Jess McHugh are in, was a charity anthology. Is a charity anthology for litworld.org, which is a world literacy charity for children's literacy. So we have done that. We'll probably do that again in the future. It's always a nice extra way to be able to give back, and if you can find a bunch of like-minded writers and find a cause that everybody agrees on, that can really help solidify a project.
Have you guys ever thought about putting out a journal or doing a Patreon for people? I mean, for you guys, that'd be a little bit tricky because you deal with so many authors. But is there something that you guys have thought about, like doing like a quarterly or anything like that in that respect?
Yeah, we are actually planning that, both actually, right?
Yeah.
All right, cool. Breaking news on GoIndieNow.
I was waiting for Rob to explain more about it. It's in the planning stages, so stay tuned.
I had my mute button on, but that was what?
Stuff from over there.
It'll be crazy.
Very cool. So you think there's still a marketplace for something like that?
Yeah, for sure. And the nice thing with Patreon, a really great example of somebody that just knocks it out of the park with their Patreon. And I'm not sure how many subscribers he has, but our friend Scott S. Phillips from New Mexico, who's been in most of our anthologies just because we love him so much. He has a Patreon where he does bad poetry every month. He does stories from when he was a screenwriter in Los Angeles, and these horrifying stories of dealing with people like Steven Seagal. And he does, behind the scenes stuff when he's writing new series, when he's writing a new book, and he does little sneak peeks. And there's so many different things that he does and he offers. And he has such a kind of an eclectic background to be able to provide that it's really exciting to keep seeing things from him. Because I mean, I've subscribed to a lot of people's email newsletters, and it's, same thing every 5 days. You get, part of a story they're working on, or you get the same announcement, you get the same old thing over and over. And eventually you just kind of tune it out and you start instantly deleting the email when you see it. Scotty really has a handle on it where it's so different all the time that you're waiting for it to show up, and when it pops up in your inbox, you're right on top of it. So that's what we're going to try and take away, and what we're going to try and do when we do it, and try and offer something special for our readers, and to bring people in, and to be able to, preview projects that we have going on. Hopefully be able to pull things in from the different writers we're working with, so that, somebody like Timothy Friend, who wrote Rocket Rider and Little Putt Putt Go Down Swinging, which is this great noir novella that we just published. He's also a filmmaker. He did his own little book trailer, and it's like the greatest thing ever. You can see it on our page or on our YouTube page. And we're hoping we can get stuff like that from our writers that we can put in every month, or, pop up as specials. And once we start doing a quarterly, we want to kind of include that stuff as well and make it a little more interactive.
Very nice. Very nice. That's awesome. That sounds like a great adventure.
I want to jump in for a second because you touched on film, and something I don't hear authors talking about very much. Maybe it's because we're so book focused. It's that every short story you put out there is intellectual property. They call it IP, and it could be optioned for films and stuff. And most authors don't think about that, but I'm going to go back to Ray Bradbury for a minute. You think about how many story ideas he had. Sometimes I'll write something really short, maybe a page, and what I'm trying to do is capture that like a dream, before it goes away, like having a dream journal. I'll do that with a short story, and then I'll stick it in my file, because that is a story idea. I don't want to lose it, right? So, we can get them out in print, and that's great, but that's also intellectual property. Every time you capture that story idea and save it somewhere, just like anywhere, that's a chance for it to be something even greater.
I agree, Deborah. I was actually, when Stephen King's 1922 came out on Netflix last year, I had my husband sit down and watch it with me. And I'm not generally very impressed by books to movies, but I was telling him that I've noticed when it's a novella that comes to the screen, they seem to capture the essence of the story so much better, because they're not having to cut out, 17 chapters of details. So short stories and novellas, I think, make fantastic groundwork for movies.
Very nice. So give everybody here, I want to know from each of you, where's a good place to start reading short stories? What's a short story favorite of yours that you think everybody should read, that maybe it's not necessarily your favorite, but one that everybody should read to kind of get an idea of what the quintessential short story should be?
Lovecraft.
I started a lot of my short story writing reading Lovecraft, so I would definitely, if you're a horror person, I would concur with that. I would also say Roald Dahl. Roald Dahl is, I think, in my opinion, one of the greatest short story writers ever, especially his story Lamb to the Slaughter, which I originally saw as a play when I was a real little kid, and then I eventually got a short story collection, Lamb to the Slaughter, William and Mary, The Man from the South, which has been shown adapted many times in like 4 rooms, and Alfred Hitchcock, Twilight Zone. So Roald Dahl for me that's the dude. Man from the South.
I go to people for the short stories. I go to people like Clive Barker, Ray Bradbury, Edgar Allan Poe. So I'm pretty eclectic in my collections, but I think if you want the pure imagery and you want to get really deep into the story really quickly, I'm going to go with Clive Barker, because so many of his short stories just drag you right in and then throw you out the other side.
Yeah, Ray Bradbury is my go-to author for short stories. He's amazing with his short stories, and I also I read a lot of mystery short stories, because when I was growing up, I read the Ellery Queen Mystery Magazine all the time. So there's mystery short stories by Edward D. Hoke, Ruth Rendell. Oh, she writes terrific short stories, and there's great stuff like that out there too.
Yeah, I'd agree with all of that. And I teach classes on genre and go over all of these kind of things and use short stories. And, you know, Bradbury, of course, Stephen King, the older Stephen King short stories, you know, things like Murders in the Rue Morgue by Poe and The Final Problem by Doyle. Those are like touchstone things that have set every crime story ever since. And I saw Frank Flesh and that Neil Gaiman. And that's actually the one that I was going to say is Forbidden Brides of the Faceless Slaves in the Secret House of the Night of Dread Desire is probably the single greatest satirical genre-mashing short story ever written. And Vonnegut, you can't beat Vonnegut for short story action. You know, they're weird, they're funny, they have so many layers, so much subtext that you have to read them 10, 15 times before you really get everything. And that is a brilliant writer. What do you got?
I was going to agree with Frank as well on Neil Gaiman. One of my favorites is How to Talk to Girls at Parties.
That's the other one I had, How to Talk to Girls at Parties.
Like, that's probably my favorite short story. And I know they're making a movie of it now, which kind of horrifies me, but...
And like Jess said, those are Jess and sorry, I forget who else said it, but those horror anthologies, I used to collect millions of those damn things. And the Clive Barker stories, there's one in particular was called The Skin Trade, had Stephen King, and it had Clive Barker, and it had all these different people in it. And there was a George R.R. Martin story called The Skin Trade, which was like the weirdest, most out there transgressive werewolf story that I'd ever read. And that totally opened my mind to the idea that you could write a story in these set genres with all these rules and you didn't have to follow the rules. And that stayed with me in everything I write. I just have this like inherent need to just stomp all over the rules.
I totally forgot to mention also Peter S. Beagle with Come Lady Death, Lila the Werewolf, like just really cool, like weirdo fantasy shit. Oh, I'm sorry. That's what I don't know if I was allowed to curse. Fantasy jams.
No worries. Don't worry about it. It happens every panel anyway. Not a big deal.
That I read every year, Joe.
It would be me.
I'm going to tell you guys a story about a short story, all right? So my favorite story is O. Henry's Gift of the Magi. All right, now I was adopted, okay? And my grandfather was a Lutheran pastor, and he had the whole collection of O. Henry. And my parents had a child, naturally, 13 years after I came along. And that Christmas, my grandfather said, I have an extra gift for you under the tree. And when I opened it, it was that book from his collection that has the Gift of the Magi. So that's my favorite short story of all time, and he knew it. And I read that every Christmas in honor of my grandfather. So that is my short story about a short story. And
that's so wonderful.
That's very nice.
I love they do on every Christmas I watch Christmas Eve on Sesame Street, which does their take of Gift of the Magi, where like Bert and Ernie, like it's. I know it's totally off topic, but I love it.
Yeah, so that's it.
Yeah, my first short story collection, I believe, was the Grimm Fairy Tales. So we're back to that thought read again.
Well, being that I run GoIndieNow, it would be remiss if I didn't mention an indie author, and is truly my favorite short story of all time. It is amazing. It has an amazing twist, and it's very well paced and done. And that is Mr. Westacott's Christmas by Michael J. Elliott. So Michael J. Elliott, I should pronunciate, so that everybody can go and get that. That is an awesome, awesome read. It's only 99 cents on Amazon, so go check that out if you guys get a chance. But continue, everybody. Anybody else?
Here, continue. I shall continue. All right, so I guess I'll go next. So yeah, one of my favorite authors for novels and short stories is Neil Gaiman. But one short story that really stands out for me is not Forbidden Brides of the Faceless Slaves in the Secret House of the Night of Dreaded Desire, but it is October in the Chair, which if you haven't read this short story, it's not very long. It's to the point, but he goes into the perspective of the months of the year, and each month of the year has something to say that we can all relate to that month of the year. And it's very, very interesting and intriguing how each of the months have their own personality and how he explores all those things. And I'm just, that's a story that has always just stayed with me and blown me away. Of course, October in the Chair, his story is a dark one, you know, October, Halloween, you know, the shadow, whatever. And then at the end of that story, he speaks to November, and November's like, nobody likes my stories because mine are too depressing. And that's because as November comes, the nights grow longer. And, you know, it just, you know, and then it ends that way. And it's kind of very interesting how he just cuts you off and just leaves you to wonder and explore what other kind of stories he has to offer. So I always find that interesting.
I've never read that. I'm November. My birthday's November. I know I need to read it. Thank you.
Yeah, for
I
sure.
wanted to add one more. Joe Lansdale had a collection called Writers of the Purple Rage, which touches on like everything. And I'm pretty sure that's the book that has Bubba Hotep in it. But there's all of these kind of standardy horror stories in the Joe Lansdale style. And then it ends with this story about Godzilla and a 12-step program. And that was another one that just kind of like, with the rules of writing short stories, you know?
And I want to add on to FD. I would say, even if you don't like audiobooks, Neil Gaiman's audiobooks narrated by himself are a treasure. You get to hear his background stories, and just the way that he brings his own stories to life is, even if you hate audiobooks, you could not hate his audiobooks. They are fantastic.
I concur.
Yeah, Neil Gaiman's very lucky in having one of those people could listen to for hours on end. And the fact that he's so invested in his stories, you can tell how much he loves them. There's a lot of passion in the way he tells them as well. And he always manages to make you connect with the story on a level that I don't think bringing in another person to do those stories would work.
So that's awesome. Everybody go check out all those great books. And one last question for everybody before we say goodbye. It's brought by the chat, and Christy Stratos of the Writer's Edge asked, is it worth it in today's day and age to submit to anthologies? Do you feel like at a certain point in your writing, do you get to a point where you say, you know what, I'm worth being paid for? Or is it still worth it to send out your work for free or pay to send your work out? Anybody do that now? What does everybody think about that?
I think that
I actually...
Sorry.
Go ahead, Amanda.
Okay, I was just going to say, for me and my perspective, anthologies has been more of an author networking experience, and I don't think that's a bad thing. I think that being able to build and have this community has been great for a lot of us. I would say it brings some new readers, and there are certain lines of anthologies that have a bigger reader base, but for me, it's simply that community is what it is.
Go ahead, Tim.
I started out in anthologies. My first two short stories were published and picked up by the same publisher. They didn't do very well as an anthology collection because it depends on the publisher and the authors involved as to how well publicized those titles can get. I think that can be a big pitfall of putting your stories into an anthology collection. However, that said, there are anthology collections I absolutely have enjoyed, especially the Brain to Books sets, because I know that the money for those goes back into the project, regardless of how much workload is done by the authors themselves to get those stories in. The amount of work that goes on behind the scenes at events like Brain to Books takes a lot of time, it takes a lot of money. And in some respects, going back to those charity anthologies, of actually supporting something you believe in, I think definitely it's worth taking the time and doing those. And, you know, the side bonus to that is you sometimes get your work out in front of a new audience. That's great. But knowing that you're supporting something you believe in passionately, I think it's one of the reasons why anthologies key to certain things work so well.
For me, short stories are what I make most of my chunk of most of my money on. Anthologies for me, I only really submit to now semi-pro or pro paying. I mean, I did when I was starting out, I did mostly, you know, for exposure a little bit, but I mean now I love submitting to anthologies, and I to me that's kind of my toast and jam. I I love submitting to fun anthologies that will give me, you know, $200 a pop. I mean, that's like the greatest thing in the world. And but yeah, it kind of sucks when you're spending yeah, I'm going to submit to this anthology, and you spend 2 months hard labor on it, and then it gets rejected, and you're like, oh, okay, I guess I'm not paying that gas bill that way this month, so let's pick up another Craigslist job. But still, for me, in the writing world, short stories are some of the biggest payoffs, the biggest, you know. I love writing novels. It's nice getting royalty checks, and they sometimes happen. But at least for short stories, I get a little bit of satisfaction right off the bat, where it's like, you did a good job, and then I kind of forget about it a little bit. Because then I move on to the next thing because of all those bills and stuff. So I for me, I'm never gonna stop writing short stories for anthologies or anything like that. That's one of the greatest joys in my life, is finding weird anthologies to submit to. But we all know.
Yeah, we try to pay semi-pro. We're creeping up, I think, now. It's you don't make a lot of money on anthologies, unfortunately, and we get lots of great stories.
No, you don't. It's just kind of that, just the you know, the pay up front thing is good. The flat fee is definitely something I would look for, but also when I was starting out submitting short stories, I would also look for fledgling presses that were putting together anthologies. And yeah, and that community that you build is probably one of the greatest things about being an author ever, is being anthologies with people and growing up with those same people that you keep getting in anthologies with, Anita and all these people. I see them in table of contents. I'm like, yeah, I've known you since you know, this great family.
And that's the best part for us. We're starting to do single author stuff and collections and novels and novellas and stuff, and really we're doing that because it honestly costs us less money to put those out, and we're hoping we can start, you know, building up the business so that we're making money from that stuff, which gives us the money to be able to do the anthologies, which is what we have fun with. And we love doing the anthologies because we get to work with Jessica McHugh or David James Keaton or Will Viharo or Sarah L. Johnson. But, you know, of course, we've got her novel too. But and a lot of the time, you know, with the presses, with publishers like us, that's how we build relationships with writers. And then when they have something bigger that they're working on. If they trust us because they've been in our anthologies, they know that they can work with us, they're more likely to offer us those things to start than they are to just shop it around and forget about us. And that's all good for us and good for the writers.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm kind of, oh, sorry. Go ahead, Nika.
I was just going to say I agree with the networking aspect of it. That's great. And also the challenge of when you find an anthology with a theme that you really, really like, and you get to write a story for that. I mean, and even if with me, even if the story gets rejected or doesn't get accepted, I often just stick them in my own collections. Like I've got a couple of stories, like I'm working on a new collection, horror collection, and I've got a couple of stories that I'd submitted that didn't get accepted, but they're going to end up in one of my collections. So, I mean, it all works out in the end.
Yeah, I agree with you, Nita. That's how I look at it, you know. You write a story and they don't like it, well, you know, it goes into your collection and you can publish it at some later point in time. And you can do something with it, make something cool out of it. And I hate when I have a thought and then I go blank. So somebody else talk.
I confess, I used to send short stories out as a test, you know, because like I said, I was with a lot of publishers. So, you know, first of all, which place would be the best place for this story? Because stories are individual things. And secondly, I haven't had a working relationship with these folks, and everybody's great on the front end. It's like, you know, people that are dating, everybody's great at first, and then you get to know them a little better, and then you're not so sure you want to be in a long-term relationship with them, right? And we're talking contracts and financials now. So I did use that as a test, and I had no problem sending them a short story and saying yes. But the longer the book got, the more particular I got about where I'd send it. And usually I had a working relationship with them first. So now that's kind of gone because I'm doing the indie thing now. And if you think about it, what you were saying about a short story collection, so you just need a certain amount of stories in order to put it into print. I mean, I think it's like 100 pages or something because you've got to have the wrap for the spine and all that. So if you're not finding a home for your story, why not put them out there? I mean, why not? There's nothing to be lost by it. I think any kind of entrepreneur, and that's what we are, you learn as much by your failures as you do by your yeses, but you learn nothing if you don't try. You've got to send them out. And stories sitting in a drawer, they do no one any good. Your reader doesn't get to read them, and you don't get to have the experience of having them out there. So circulate them. They want to be read. I mean, stories are living, breathing things. And so I can look at a house and say, hey, I think this one would really fit here. It's got that tone. It's got that feel to it. When I look at the other house and I'm like, no, that one just isn't quite right for them. And with short stories, they can be so individual like that because they're not cookie cutter. They're not, you know, like if you write a Western, this must happen and this must happen, and romance is somewhat that way, although I break rules all the time. But short stories are so individual that it's good to find the good home for them. So I think as we're thinking about this, I think we all do that. You know, if we just look at our story and go, okay, what would be a good home for this one? Who's my reader? You know, where do I want this to circulate? And find a good home for it and a good match, and then it'll take off. At least that's how it's worked for me. So I'd send them out. There's nothing to be lost. I mean, if you get a no, you get a no. Then you just move on and you knock on the next door till you get a yes. That's how you do it. That's how we had to do it back when you couldn't self-publish. You know, you couldn't sit there and cry because you got a rejection letter. There's not time for that. You got to send the next one out and the next one out. Send it to
I agree.
50 people.
I agree with you.
Harry Potter books, I forget how many. I lost the number, but she sent it all over the place and people said no. But she didn't give up. You know, we just got to send them. They'll find homes. They will. I do believe that. I see it happen all the time.
Stephen King had a dartboard behind him full of rejection letters.
That's it.
Yeah. I agree with you, Deborah. That was good what you said. You know, me being more of a full-length novel writer as opposed to short stories, like I said, I haven't actually published any short stories officially, although I've written a plethora of short stories. It's definitely something I want to get into more as far as being part of anthologies and being tagged with other authors and seeing what they're writing, and I think that's a great experience overall, you know. Like this short story that I recently worked on, I was prompted to do something. I was like, that's something I would never write about, but I was like, you know what, I'm gonna write that because it's a challenge, you know, and I like to be able to challenge myself, and I think us as writers, I think we all like to challenge ourselves at some point in time, and it helps us grow. But definitely, I think of anthologies as an effective marketing tool, kind of like a compilation, a music compilation with hundreds and hundreds of different bands. You know, you throw the CD in, and listen to me, I'm being archaic here. You throw in your jump drive or whatever, and you start listening to all these different bands, and you know this music style is a lot different from the next, and you just discovered somebody that's totally has a different flavor, a different style. It's kind of, I look at these anthologies kind of like that. So when I was approached to and asked to do one for this particular anthology, I was like, yeah, sure. And I was checking out all the other authors on there, and it's like, yeah, this would be interesting to see what they write. And we're all writing about something similar that's collectively one thing. So it'll be definitely interesting to see all these different styles come together and be shown, you know, out in public. So yeah.
Awesome. Anybody else want to add anything? No.
Are we on?
Yep.
Yeah, we just want to add as an aside that Jess seems to be having so much fun there in Maryland with a giant beer that we had to get a couple of drinks.
Yep.
I'm sorry. It's the holiday.
Oh yeah.
Well,
cheers.
Nice. Very cool.
I've now been joined by a couple of cats here, so
Well,
you're up way too late, honey.
Well, this has been an awesome discussion. Thank you so much, everybody, for being here and doing this for me. I really appreciate it. You guys this was fantastic. You guys were so awesome. And we'll let everybody know where you are and who you are and where they can find you. And then we'll say goodnight. So why don't I start? I'm going to go right to left this time. And Mr. Timothy Bateson, you're up first. You're still mute, sir.
I'm Timothy Bateson, along with my wife, Sandy. I'm the author of the Shadows Over Seattle series of prequel short stories, as well as the upcoming novels that we're currently working on. I can be found at, if you just read the bottom of the screen there, timothybatesonauthor.weebly.com, and over on my blog at timothybatesonauthor.wordpress.com, where I do blog short story anthologies out for people. I know several people here have already had their faces featured from it. So go ahead, drop in a line, and if anyone's interested in experimenting with short stories, I'm more than happy to link you up with writing prompts and everything like that.
Very awesome. All right, Jessica.
I'm Jessica McHugh, novelist, poet, playwright, weirdo, smiley pie. My first short story collection. This is my 10th anniversary of being a published author, by the way. My first novel was published in 2008. So my first short story collection is coming out my 10th year as a published author. Super jazzed. It's based in a weird hybrid bee people universe in 1912. There's a story that takes place on the Titanic. I'm not going to spoil it for you. I would never do that, the Titanic story. So yeah, I'm really excited. I got a new novel coming out from Raw Dog Screaming Press, a dystopian fantasy novel coming out soon. So I'm really jazzed that I got to hang out with so many radtacular inky cohorts and talk about one of the things I love most in the world, short stories. So thank you guys again. Hey.
Thank you. That's awesome. Thank you for being here. I really appreciate it. You were awesome. I really appreciate it. It's very cool to have you here. All right, Mr. Gross. That didn't come out right. How about just Frank?
Oh,
Hi, Frank.
I'm up and I just forgot to unmute, but hey, what's up? Frank Gross here, otherwise known as FD Gross. I am the author of my only published work right now, which is called Wolfgang, which is actually a trilogy. Wolfgang is book 1 of the Wolfgang trilogy. I have a second book coming out this year, later in the fall, called The Inquisition, which is book 2 of that series. And I also have a first short story coming out in the summer sometime. You can check me out on Facebook, Twitter. Check out my YouTube channel. I'm going to be having trailers posted on there for the second book coming out. That's FD Gross channel. It's the channel with the skull. Yeah, so I like writing and I write, and yeah, it's what I do when I'm not working or spending time with my loved ones. But yeah, check it out. You can also check out my website, which is wolfgangchronicles.com. And yeah, just go there, check it out, see what's going on. And also on my YouTube channel, I did my own book readings of Wolfgang. So if you don't want to buy it, just at least go on there, check it out, see if you like it. You can listen to my version of what the audiobook of Wolfgang would sound like. And it comes with my words from my mouth and also a musical soundtrack and some imagery as well. So it was good chatting with you all. Y'all were great. And yeah, thanks.
It is awesome. It is one of the best things I've seen on YouTube. It is fantastic. I loved his readings. They're really amazing. And I'll have the link for everybody so you can go check that out. And he's a modest man, but he's also, if any of you are metal fans, he is a metal musician as well with an awesome band. So which I'll have the link to as well because I think they're awesome. So all right, Deborah.
All right. So I have a new YouTube thing I'm doing too. I'm glad you mentioned that. I might have forgotten. I started reading the first chapter of some of my books. I've got 4 of them up there right now. I've got 13 out, so I've got a ways to go. But you can find me on DebraParmley.com and on all kinds of social media, Facebook and Twitter and all that jazz. I write in many subgenres of romance, and my newest, I have, actually this is my most recent book, A Change of Scenery, which was originally a short story in AMSG collection, which you'll see that on Goodreads, but that went out of print. We got our rights back. Then I sent it to Burroughs, and then they put it out. Then I got it back, Secret Cravings. They put it out, and then I got it back when they closed. And now it's book 1 in my trilogy, which is dystopian romance. And that's my most recent, just came out March 29th. So you can find that one. You can find several short stories. You won't find More Monsters from Memphis because it's gone out of print and I can't find the publisher. That one has my first short story, the horror story that I was telling you about. You can find in the used bookstores, maybe if you're lucky. So yeah, you can find me all over the place. And I want to thank Joe for inviting me. Joe and I met on a fundraiser for Puerto Rico, which was awesome. And see what good can come from all this stuff, right? So now I'm here and meeting all y'all, and it's been really nice. I've enjoyed the chat. And I hope everyone will keep in touch. And thanks, Joe.
Thank you, Deborah. That's very nice of you. Thank you. And it sounds like you just issued a challenge. I'm gonna find that, and I'm gonna find that anthology for you. All right, Coffin Hop Press, Axel, Rob.
Oh, it's already on. Okay, then go ahead.
Just my website is www.tinysledgehammer.com, or you can find my stuff on our published stuff on coffinhop.com. My short story collection is, you can see that, Fishing with the Devil, and other. It's a collection.
And HOWERTON. This is my last novel, this fabulous psychological noir weirdo ghost story thing, Con Morte. My next book is part of my Wolf and Devil series with Tyche Books, which comes out sometime in the fall. Again, we're Coffin Hop Press. You can find us online at www.coffinhop.com. If you go to our submit page, it has all of our upcoming anthologies and projects, information on how to contact us if anybody has any crime novellas or weird stuff that they're looking for a place for. And yeah, you can find all of our stuff on the website, or if you just search us on social media, just hashtag Coffin Hop, all one word, you'll find us. And
yeah, thanks a lot, Joe.
Cheers.
Thanks, guys, for being here. And I have to say, we were talking about blurbs off of the air, and Con Morte has one of the best blurbs I've ever read. And you guys are super good at that. So check out what they're doing, because they're fantastic. They're very unique stuff. All right, Amanda?
All right. I'm Amanda Mabry, dark fiction, fantasy, and poetry writer, also one of the co-owners of Our Right Side. If you like to read short stories, my collection, Darker Days, just released this past March. If you like to write short stories, Our Right Side still has an open call for our Glass and Ashes anthology. The open call ends June 15th, and we are looking for Cinderella reimaginings. You can find everything about me at authoralmabry.com, including my social media links and the links to Our Right Side.
Very nice. Thank you very much for being here, my friend. I really appreciate it. All right, Anita.
Okay, I'm Anita A.F. Stewart. My website is Welcome to Avalon. You can also find me over on Twitter at Scribe77. And I have a Facebook group, A.F. Stewart's Minions. And I've got lots of short stories out there in anthologies like this one here, Legends and Lore. That one has my Camelot Immortal story in it, which is soon to be a book series, if I ever get the time to write it. And I've also written the Killers and Demons series, and the third book in that one should be coming up next year, I think. And I have a story in a horror anthology that's coming out in a few weeks as well. So that's me.
Awesome. Thank you for being here, my friend. I really appreciate it. And I am Joe Compton. This is GoIndieNow. If you don't know where you are, click on the name GoIndieNow. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. We would love to have you be a part of our family. We do all kinds of different shows, not only just this live panel, which we do monthly, but we have our flagship show, which comes out at the last Friday of every month, which next week will be that. We'll have our 26th episode, and we've got some great interviews in that and some great segments for you all in that. And we have lots of great stuff coming up. We do our This Week in Indies is going to be that's our weekly show on Facebook that you can check us out at, facebook.com/GoIndieNow. And that is precluded by preceded, I should say, by a live chat that I do every Sunday night on Facebook. So if you're a friend of mine, you'll be able to check me out there 10 p.m. Eastern every Sunday night that I try to do that. And I am also an author. I guess I should start mentioning that more often. But I wrote a crime thriller called Amongst the Killing. So if you're so inclined, if you like crime thrillers, go check that out. It's available everywhere, and it's available in all formats, audiobook included. And with that, it's always time to go indie now, and we'll see you again next time. Thanks, everybody.